And when I run this, you can see that the app runs similar to what we showed you before. You have the list of the products down below. You can click to order, and you'll see that when I order one of these, I get the ability to enter an email address and office location. I have a checkbox that says let my colleagues know, that will post a message to a SharePoint newsfeed. And here you can see a bunch of the back office integration taking place, or maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just a different app that an admin goes into, takes a look, and actually does the ordering. But you get the idea. Okay, so that's apps for SharePoint with Visual Studio. We'll now talk about app deployment and lifecycle. And a lot of times, we talk a lot about building out an app. We talk about all the way to publish an app, and then we're kind of like, okay, have fun. You've published the app now. Good luck. Well, with the app for Office and SharePoint model, we've actually started to and have an entry into a bunch of services that extend beyond publish. And so we'll talk a little bit about publish, as well as the management and maintainability of these apps, because ultimately, hey, that's actually where most of the costs actually start to accrue. It's maintaining an app versus actually developing it. So deploying apps, we'll start with the deployment part, though. Deploying is pretty straightforward. The way I think about deployment is really just about a developer wanting to get their apps out to a user. Yep, sometimes, very common, there's an admin in between, but we'll kind of gloss over that for the purposes of this and just say that the developer's doing their part to actually get this out to end users. So, should be pretty obvious right now, but there's essentially a web project that goes to a web server, and there's this app manifest or app package, and the app package contains both the manifest and some of the SharePoint artifacts like lists, workflows, and other things that we talked about, remote event receivers. And that goes over to the Office store or app catalog. From there, the hosting applications like SharePoint, Excel, Word, and so on that your users are using can find those apps and allow your users to insert them or add them or use them. And that, in turn, when they use them, goes and hits that web server. So that's the overall flow of what we want to do here. So when an app is in one of these stores, what does that look like? Well, on the left, I have the Office store, the web page, and Excel, for Excel. And you can see there's tabs, Excel, Outlook, Project, SharePoint, and so on. And if you've used any store before, it'll look really familiar. Yeah, there are reviews, there are ratings. You can browse the different apps. One of the things that is different with one of these productivity or business app type of stores is that it is much more curated. So the big numbers aren't there, but the types of apps are a lot more interesting to business users. On the right, we have an app catalog. An app catalog, this is that internal store of sorts. The app catalog is just a SharePoint site with 3 lists. It has a list for apps for SharePoint, a list for apps for Office, and finally the third list is one that's managed. The purpose of the third list is for your users to go and surf different apps and say, hey, like in the public store, and say, hey, hey admin, I really like this app. Can you go and purchase it for the company? And so that's the request for apps. Now, once the apps are in the store, your end users get a consistent experience for adding and using apps. In SharePoint, there's an add an app to a site. It shows up in site contents as a tile, very unified with what they expect in SharePoint, and you can put all your apps in a single place. On the right, apps for Office, integrated in the Office ribbon. There's an apps for Office button in the ribbon in Excel, Word, Project, PowerPoint, and so on, and you can add apps from there, either on the right side as a task pane or inside the document. After an app has been added, well, what do you get from there? Well, you get some monitoring. As an IT admin, you can go and look and see how much apps are being used. So maybe you bought X number of licenses for your company, and you realize that X over 2 is actually being used. Well, maybe we should change that. The other thing you get is error logs, update information. So you can actually monitor, and this is one of the things that you get with these apps for Office. It's baked into the app model, is the ability to get some telemetry and monitoring. If you're not liking an app, if it's failing a lot, if it's causing problems, you can retract that app, and very easily. So let's look at publishing apps for Office and SharePoint. And for that, I'll go back to this app that we're kind of messing around with a little bit, this hardware purchasing app, and it was an auto-hosted app. So I can click Publish, and because this is creating a single package where the web project is going out to a SharePoint managed location, and all we're doing is creating a package, I introduce to you the simplest publish dialog of all time. There's only one checkbox on it. and, oh, you can't quite see it, but a finish button. And that's it. I don't think we'll ever have a publish dialog as simple as that ever again. Anyway, so it creates a single .app package, but in that .app package are two packages. One, a SharePoint WSP package for the SharePoint project, and two, a web project. Actually, the package for the web project, and we use the web deploy package for that. So those are both inside this .app package. So I'll dock that left, and I'll go back to the hardware purchasing app that we were on before. I'll dock it right. And one of the things that I can do is, actually I'll undock it so I can see the button that I want to get to. In SharePoint, I can actually start navigating to the app catalog and show you what that looks like. So there you have it, and as you might expect, it looks just like a list. Now I can take this .app package and drag it into the app catalog, and what I've done here, just with a matter of a drag drop, is make that app available to my corporation. But it's not installed, it's not running, there's no instance available at this point in time. Now, that's fine. You can go to each site and actually provision an instance off from this app catalog and have it run on the site. But you probably, as a corporation, don't want multiple instances of this running. So instead, what you can do is go to Site Contents and do a tenant-wide deployment of this app. So I'll click to add this app, and this hardware purchasing app wasn't there before I actually dragged that in. It is now there. I can trust it. That's the OAuth dialog. And that app is now installed and running for my corporation. And so the purpose of this demo is just to really show how easy it is to deploy out apps in a unified way to your corporation. So we'll go back to Visual Studio, though. I want to go back to this hardware purchasing app because auto hosting is pretty straightforward. It's simple. You don't have to worry about hosting, but it is limited in some ways in that you don't have as much access to the server being used. You also have limits on CPU and storage and other things like that. So if you have outgrown this model, what does it take to actually go to a different model? Well, you just bring up the app manifest, and you can change the hosting type from auto-hosted to provider-hosted. And that really doesn't do much kind of visually here, but it creates a different type of package. Well, it creates two packages. When I hit publish, I'll get a date.app package and a web deploy package, and they go off to different places. Once that app package is installed in SharePoint, what I can do is leverage the capabilities of the web app. Actually, let me close these up. So I can click Publish on the web app and get the full capabilities of publishing from the web project. Again, leveraging standard ASP.NET technologies. I can deploy to Windows Azure websites that James talked about yesterday. I can deploy to my own web server. I can use publish profiles to make that easy for me to deploy. But what if I want to grow out of Windows Azure websites and actually use these Windows Azure cloud services for N-tier, bigger projects and apps? Well, I can do that as well. This is an ASP.NET web project, so I can click and add Windows Azure Cloud Service, and that's doing a couple things for me. It's adding a Windows Azure Cloud Service project to the solution, and it's also adding that web project as a web role within that Windows Azure Cloud Service. And now I can leverage the full capabilities of Windows Azure. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go back to publishing apps for Office and SharePoint and talk about what you can do here. What are some of the key messages? Well, really, we showed you the ability to leverage Windows Azure. We have flexible hosting models, and you can leverage Azure websites, cloud services, SQL Azure. In fact, the application building blocks that James showed you yesterday, you can all leverage when building these apps for Office and SharePoint. And that's particularly interesting because you essentially now have two sets of services you can use, both Windows Azure and Office 365, to build out your apps. And having building blocks is a great thing. It just makes your life easier. So let's actually talk about Team Foundation Service a little bit. I want to talk about deployment in a different context. I'm going to switch back to my app here, actually a different version of the app, the more built-out one. And I want to talk about a type of deployment that developers care about. Continuous deployment, continuous integration and deployment. Running tests in the cloud, building in the cloud, and essentially being able to do that in a continuous fashion to avoid kind of integration errors and so on and so forth. It's something we love at At Microsoft, we use it in Napa, we use it in TFS in developing the service, both of which are running on Windows Azure, by the way. And we support it in our tools. So let's look at this project. You can see here that potentially I have a change that I want to make in the Chrome control instead of internal hardware purchasing. Maybe I just say, well, actually I could say like VS Live hardware purchasing. And I'll hit save. Okay, so I'll close these up a little bit and bring up Team Explorer. And what I'm going to do is show you the Builds tab. And in the Builds tab, I actually have two build definitions. I have one for auto-hosted and one for provider-hosted. So every time I check in a change, I have a continuous deployment to two different apps, which are actually the same app, but one is auto-hosted and one's provider-hosted. Now, to set up continuous integration for these apps is actually quite easy. What we've done is we have a Codeplex project where we've made some PowerShell scripts and a process template available to you. So under process, you can see here, as soon as this loads, that I have a process template for this project. But really, it was just a matter of using the existing Office Tools app template that I got from this Codeplex project. After I got that, I had to configure a PowerShell script that contained my credential information, and that's listed down here. So for example, what server am I deploying to? What's the username and password to actually deploy to that site? But that's it. That's all I had to do. And from there, what that means is I can actually go to pending changes, and when I click to check in the change that I just made, the continuous deployment is actually fired off for me. So I'm going to show that actually in the context of the web version of TFS, which has actually matured a ton over the course of the last year, where you can see that I have 0 queues, builds queued, but because I've made that check-in, if I refresh, you can see that 2 are showing up. And a key point to this is actually, this build is not running on this machine. I could turn it off right now. It's not running on a build machine that I set up. It's actually running in build servers in the cloud that TFS is managing for me. And I didn't have to configure those build machines. In fact, they already are configured with a host of libraries and SDKs and everything else so that you can just leverage them and you don't have to maintain your own build server. So I can flip to, it takes about 3 minutes for one of these to complete. I'll flip to a completed one, and you can see that I have this auto-hosted one. You can trust the app, that trust dialog, or just go ahead and open the app. And of course, the change I just made isn't reflected yet because it's still being built, but you get the idea. Continuous integration, all leveraging TFS and the service. The other thing that you're seeing here is the integration between Windows Azure, TFS, Visual Studio, and Office 365. All right, so you saw some of the capabilities of TFS, the service, notably build and source control. Let's talk a little bit about all the other capabilities that it has. So you have a home page in TFS that's highly customizable. You can place actually by default, none of these tiles exist, and you would drag drop these tiles in based on what you want to show in that home page. Burn downs, bug counts, and so on and so forth. Of course, there's source control. And I was showing you TFS version control there, integrated with Visual Studio. But we also support Git in TFS, a recent announcement earlier in the year. And this isn't a Microsoft-flavored Git. This is real Git. We contribute to the libgit2 project. It's completely 100% compatible with the rest of the Git tooling out there. So real Git repositories in TFS. Build server in the cloud for continuous integration. Deploying to Windows Azure directly? Check. It's available in TFS. Of course, you have full work item support, work items, bugs, Scrum boards, and so on. Here you can drag, I'm showing the Scrum board, but you can drag drop tasks into the various sprints. So all that capability is available for you. Excuse me. And what does it cost you? Well, for up to 5 users, a small team, actually it's free. tfs.visualstudio.com, definitely go and get it. It's a lot of fun to use, and you'll be surprised at the kind of developer capabilities you can get in the cloud. Certain MSDN subscriptions also include TFS, similar to what I was talking about with the Office developer, tenant developer site subscription. You get some of that with MSDN as well. So kind of just to wrap up a little bit and kind of bring everything together, let's talk about some of the key takeaways of what I've shown you today. Well, I've shown you the value of apps is now available in Office and SharePoint, and hopefully for you non-Office and SharePoint developers, you've seen how actually you can leverage a lot of the services that you're already using and create entry points for Office and SharePoint. And for web apps, even look at web apps and business apps, even consider building those apps on SharePoint and understand the value that SharePoint plus Windows Azure provide to you as an app platform. It's built with web standards and .NET. You build these apps with web standards and .NET. Existing technologies, transferable skill sets. There's both a public Office store and internal app catalog that you can manage these apps. And you get lifecycle management and telemetry baked in. You can leverage Windows Azure. And again, combining these two clouds, Windows Azure plus Office 365, to just give you more capabilities as a developer. You can manage the developer lifecycle with TFS in the cloud. And we have first-class tools with Napa and Visual Studio, Napa being the on-ramp to the Visual Studio, full Visual Studio experience. But let's bring this back full circle. What have I shown you today? Well, I've shown you Office 365. I've shown you Windows Azure being leveraged by Office 365. I've shown you TFS deploying to both Windows Azure and Office 365. And I've shown you how Visual Studio ties all of these things together. And collectively, you can use Office 365 and Windows Azure as an app platform for your app development. So with that, get started now. dev.office.com. And also, dev.windowsazure.com and tfs.visualstudio.com. I want to thank you all for being here today. I had a lot of fun. Hope you found it useful.